Hi, my name is Dan Glass, and this is my lecture on the thesis. As we can tell from the past lessons that we've done into our present reality, you've already learned a lot about utilizing databases, utilizing credentialed sources, what makes credentials, looking at editorials and blogs and sifting out facts from fiction, as well as opinions, difference between primary sources, secondary sources, and tertiary sources. In addition, we've also read Carl Sagan's Baloney Detection Kit, where we looked at the difference between how people present objective facts and how people try to hoodwink us. So now we're going to be applying it to our own sources because we are going into an argumentative essay. What that means is that we're going to need info to work on the topics that we've chosen. Last week I asked you to come up with potential topics that you want to use, and tonight we're going to start putting them towards the SOAP note method, which, if you are friends with any nurses or if you've ever done anything within that field, you know that SOAP stands for subjective, which is qualitative data. The emotions, the opinions that people have when they go to the hospital, when they're asked what's wrong with them, they give their personal opinion, not a medical opinion. Objective is the tests that we take. They're everything from our blood pressure to our blood levels. Assessment, the doctors figure out what's wrong and then they create a plan on how to deal with it. That's what you're going to be doing with your topics here. You're going to create an argument which isn't far from persuasion, but it's definitely a lot more definite than the open-ended expository essays that we've already done. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that information together with information that you have that's both empirical, things that you've observed in your life, literary review, things from experts that have also observed these, and occasionally surveys, although they're not quite as objective. It still is nice to know what everybody else thinks in the process. So, when we're coming up with a thesis generation, the first thing we do is we use an algebraic statement, which is what effect, if any, does X have on Y? The concept of that, obviously, it does seem like algebra with the X and the Y. What effect, if any, does an independent variable have on a dependent variable? What effect, if any, does a snowball that's thrown at a window at 95 miles an hour have on whether it breaks or not? If we're in the business of making solid windows and selling them, we want to know that they can withstand gale force winds, especially for someplace like New Hampshire. Now, with that, if we were doing a psychological study, for instance, we'd have an independent variable affecting a dependent variable. But for us, what we're really looking at is we're looking at questions that we can put up to our research and ask it things like, is this really true? How can we determine that it's true? And we'll look at some examples of that in a few minutes. But as I said, it's a lot different than the expository essays where any old hero will do, but here we definitely want a right or wrong answer. We don't want knee-jerk reactions. We obviously know that we're going to get some kind of dissent because there's always someone who'll disagree and present alternative information, but we want to be able to hit with the best answer that generalizes the correct answer the best. So if we look at some samples here with an issue in the current events, we can put the what effect, if any, does X have on Y up here to the straw band. And what the straw band looks at is there's a lot of extra straws getting thrown away. They make their way into the ocean. And maybe if we get rid of them from restaurants, we'll eliminate some of this pollution. And if we don't follow that rule, then there's oftentimes a penalty for that, which can be as high as $250 in some places. So if we put the questions here where we're thinking of our thesis, what effect, if any, does a straw ban have on people feeling like they're making a difference for saving the environment? What effect does it actually have on the environment? What does it have on the economy? Will people go to those restaurants or not if they stop using straws? And if we move to the last one, this one is a very interesting way of looking at it. What effect, if any, does a straw ban have on people who might need them to be able to enjoy their meal? For example, if people have extreme tremors, they may not be able to hold a glass, therefore they need a straw to drink from it. Will a restaurant be fined for those people being able to use a straw? These are questions that we have to ask, and we don't often consider these things. So it's definitely important to know who all is affected, how, and why. When we come up with that, we will use information that is subjective. There'll be credentialed people, there'll be experts in the field, and they'll be able to say their opinions based on their expert abilities to help other people. We also need objective facts. How many pounds of straws are thrown away every year? How many find their way to the ocean? Obviously, you're familiar with Twitter, where 140 characters or less creates an opinion, but these aren't necessarily what we're going for. Obviously, we can show how they exemplify certain things, but we can't use them as any kind of a truth. So the question is, how can you find the right solution to come up with your thesis? We need to look at the information and see, as it says here from the Baseball Historical Abstract, one of my favorite books, what's missing from the picture, what's distorted here and what's accurately portrayed. How can we include what's been left out of the data? How can we correct what's been distorted? And these are all important questions for anything that you're going to ask. Whether you're looking at whether TV ghost shows are actually real, whether a straw ban is essential, or for issues with going on with the president and some of the other things that he might want to do right now with immigration or with the national park system or the education system. All of those can be checked out here, and they can be checked out with the Carl Sagan test as well. So when we find our information and we find these reactions, obviously some reactions can be good, like with your medicines that you take. Some medicines will help solve the problem. Why are the reactions caused? What side effects do the reactions create? We all know this because we've probably all taken medicine that might have given us a rash or made us feel nauseous, or known someone who has. But those are a simple way of looking at it. Then we go into how can the bad reactions be prevented. With the straw ban, obviously we don't want to affect people with disabilities, but we don't want all the pollution in our oceans. What's going to help out? So are there further ramifications from the reactions? Might seem easy to please people, we'll save the environment, but are we helping all people by doing it? Important things to consider. So when you find the information, you're coming up with your thesis, which obviously we know is the main idea of the paper. How will we measure how the reaction happens? What kind of solid evidence do we have? Is it something more than just my neighbor Bill said so? Do we actually have scientific proof? Do we have people who've studied the effect? That's what you want to look for, and that'll help you find your best sources to back up your thesis. So how will you define success and failure, since they're value words? That's also important to consider, because one man's success might be another man's failure. So we definitely need to look into that. So as we said before, and we've talked about this, and it's important to come back to this again and again, it is an all-purpose main idea in your words. It's a sentence, it ends with a period, since it's definite, and it cannot be a quote, because that would be plagiarism. It's backed up by forecasts, which are reasons why or why not. Some people might find it challenging to write this in the beginning. That's why we go with the research questions to help us determine it. Some people might also try to force their opinions into something. When we're researching, just like in science, we have to make sure that we're not just taking it to a certain place and giving into partisan politics. So stay away from the value words and the absolutes, and try to find the best truth that you can. So, as we said at the end of last class, what do you want your topic to be? Now you're asked to create research questions to help figure that out. So, your assignment for the next 10 minutes is this: to come up with several potential research questions for this topic. Once you find them, you need to write about potential answers, like I did when I talked to you about the straw ban. Then you're going to pick a side to develop a preliminary thesis for it with preliminary forecast statements. Remember, you can change your thesis as you go along. If you find that it's not right, obviously you need to move away from it. Finally, I'm going to come up to each one of you and help you out momentarily, but right now I need to know if anybody has any questions. Yes, Bill.